On February 23rd, 2022, in the evening, I had a quarrel with my wife. She didn't believe me. She said that there could be no invasion because Russians are mostly normal. I said that they were in the majority, uses expletives, and therefore something bad would happen, begins the 59-year-old man from Cherkasy region's story about his year at the front. On the morning of February 24, he packed everything he needed in his backpack and went to war. He asks not to give his name, but only his call sign, Old Man. In civilian life, for decades he was engaged in small business. He made furniture, baked bread, and worked for himself all the time. In 2014, he also went to war and fought in the battles at the Donetsk airport, where his health was seriously damaged and his hearing was almost taken away by the shell shock. This is a story about an ordinary Ukrainian man who, despite his advanced age and poor health, managed to get to the front in the first days of the Russian invasion and went through almost all the hottest spots of the war in a year, just like hundreds of thousands of people like him. It illustrates how the country survived, what is in the minds of Ukraine's defenders, how the army lives and fights on a daily basis, how it drinks, gets sick, kills, and dies. We talked to the old man in the woods near Kyiv. They were transferred there before February 24, 2023, directly from Bakhmut to rest, and in case Russia did attack the capital again. His story is told in the first person. The first day of the war, until the last moment, I did not believe that there would be such a big invasion. I thought there would be an offensive in Donbas. I could not even imagine such shelling of civilians and residential areas throughout Ukraine. There is no forgiveness for this. The military is one thing, we are standing, we shoot at them, they shoot at us. It's clear. And there are no censored words for them. I can't understand this. How many relatives and friends I had in Russia? They have seen our life here all their lives. They clung to that fascism in Bandera. Where did they get that? On the morning of February 24th, rockets even hit our Smila. I packed a backpack with everything I needed: soap, socks, underpants, a towel, toothpaste, a piece of lard. I went to the military enlistment office, and they said, yes, you are going. In the evening, we were taken by bus to the 95th Brigade in Zhytomyr. But there I was immediately told that I was no longer suitable for the airborne brigade. I was 58 years old at the time. They also measured my blood pressure, which was not good. I was immediately kicked off the beach. They cut off about 5 of us brave men and sent us home. We stormed the military enlistment office every day. And on the 1st of March, we were finally taken to Kropivnitsky to the 57th Brigade. They didn't look at our age or take our blood pressure, but sent us to Lysychansk a few days later. Later, I realized that our brigade was quite peculiar. The attitude of the higher command was not what I would have liked. How did you get to the front? On the spot, I was changed, given weapons, and sent to a position in the village of Voronova, near Sievierodonetsk. It was still 70% inhabited. There was a forest, and our infantry behind the village, and then the Russian positions. It was a very unpleasant place, because we were in a kind of wedge, and the enemy was on several sides. In this war, I serve in a mortar unit. Until last spring, I had seen mortars on TV, did not know how they worked, and then I learned. I mostly worked in support, packing mines, screwing the head, firing pin, powder. Sometimes I loaded a mine, threw it into a mortar, and pulled the trigger on the lanyard. At least 4 people manned the mortar, but there were usually 8 of us. We stand on the second line of the front. On the first line, there's our infantry, and there's Russians. And behind the infantry, we are standing 2 kilometers away. We work at such a distance because of our infantry along their first line. Naturally, we immediately receive fire from their side. We fought in Voronove for more than 2 months. They started shelling the village very heavily. There was no day or night without shelling, sometimes every hour. In addition to mortars, we were hit by tanks, self-propelled artillery systems, grads, and all other rather unpleasant things. People left the village. Only a few remained who were stubbornly reluctant to leave. There were special units that were engaged in evacuation. The situation with livestock was terrible. Cows, chickens, pigs, everything was left unowned, and we were walking around the village. In Voronove, our unit was spared by God. By a miracle, there were not even 300 people. We got used to determine what was flying where by the sound. I can't hear it almost since 2014, and the guys were quick to say that the exit was coming, so we took cover. Eventually, the shelling became so intense that we could not even set up the mortar and get to the position. Physically, we were immediately covered, and the Russian fire was non-stop. Finally, the unthinkable happened. They hit our mortar with a mortar when we were trying to work. We left the village that night and were taken to Severodonetsk. But there we were, given a new mortar, and I immediately sent back. And then we exhaled and went out to take a break. But fuck it, go back there. What can you do? You have to. We moved to another house. Again, there was a mortar in the garden. The basement was better, although it was very cold and damp, and everyone was constantly coughing and sniffling. Food and water were delivered normally. Stew, meat, sausage, cheese, and fruit. We didn't want to eat anything from the basement. The chickens were quickly sorted out. The owners left them, as well as the food. We kept feeding them, and every day we got 10 fresh eggs. We poured water, poured wheat, and the chickens pecked at it. Of course, the second time they could have slaughtered a chicken. We retreated from there in an organized manner when the threat of encirclement was very high. What does the exit look like? The infantry should be the first to leave, and we cover them. Then, we are the last to leave. We were given the coordinates where to shoot in order to hold back the Russian advance behind ours. Our infantry left, but we were never given the command to fire. It was clear that they were not chasing our asses. They retreated, but the Russians were still standing. We'd also calmly rolled up and left. In Severodonetsk, we first settled on the southern outskirts, Metyolkino, near the garages. The mortar was in the garage, and they were shooting from there. A few weeks later, we moved closer to the river to the dacha village of Sirotino. The city was already heavily bombed, we were defending ourselves, and we were demolished by a wall of artillery. We already had generators, fuel was delivered, we had just been given a Starlink, and we had communication. In total, we fought in the north for about a month. There was a constant shortage of ammunition. They would bring 10 or 20 mines, we used them quickly, and then sat there. We didn't have our own drone yet, and the Russians had plenty of them. It was only in the Kherson region that the guys learned to be drone operators and started working. In the north, I remember most of all the constant tension, nerves, and the threat of encirclement. We were in the palm of the Russians' hands, and the local population that remained was categorically against us. Even though we brought water, bread, and stew, the attitude was very noticeable. The Russians were constantly bombarding us. They had a huge advantage in firepower. We were defending ourselves and constantly retreating. One day, our specialists came in at the end, and then the GUR said it was theirs. We were not far away at the time. A gang of 15 to 20 people came in. The guys were complete scumbags, well-trained. They inflicted many losses on the Russians and took prisoners. But the lull after that was short-lived. The shock of the Russian army, quickly passed. This is not how you win a war. At first, there were 4 bridges from the north. They quickly occupied 2 of them. The headquarters was in Lysychansk, on the other side of the river. Food and ammunition, rotations, and everything else was transported across the other 2 bridges. But they were quickly destroyed one by one, and the escape route was closed. We were able to get some medical supplies and everything we needed by river, but you can't carry much on rubber boats at night. Every few days, 10 mines were brought in, so we still worked. We stayed without bridges for several weeks. Then the command came that we were leaving. We arrived at the crossing at night. There was a lot of equipment there. Like at a market, everyone came, unloaded, and left. We used 2 boats to cross. We took the mortar and left the heavier stuff behind. Lysychansk, and the first losses. We didn't fight in Lysychansk for long, maybe 3 weeks. It was there that we suffered our first losses. The mortar quickly broke down, and there were not enough people to defend it. Our entire battery was thrown into the trenches as infantry. We arrived at the position, started digging in. Everyone was scattered. I got to the very end of the landing to watch the railroad and the passage under it. We heard that shooting started behind us, in the rear, actually. We ran to see what happened to our guys. There were no radios, and the phones were not working. In the place where our guys were, some subversive group entered. There was a fight. We found Tolik's bloody bulletproof vest, and his body was returned soon, and 3 others who were captured alive were exchanged in January. We defended ourselves in that landing for a while. The units next to us withdrew and told us to run away, because it would be... Oops. Our commander kept saying, "Let's go, we'll defeat them all." So we stayed. A massive shelling started. There was a tank, an armored personnel carrier, machine guns, and machine guns. We couldn't stick our heads out, and we were with assault rifles. I also had an underbarrel grenade launcher. We were shooting back, and I even saw a few Russians, maybe even killed one. But the fire was heavy. Our guys were still behind us. They were shooting at them through us, and they were shooting at us from there. I thought that either they would hit us in the back of the head, or those bastards would hit us in the forehead. It was an unpleasant sight. After an hour of intense fighting, there was a pause of half a minute. And at that moment, we fled to the woods. It was hot there too, but their equipment could not cross the railroad, and their infantry was in no hurry to catch up without equipment. While defending Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, our brigade was hit hard, especially the infantry. The losses were very high. About a third of our men were killed and wounded. We were already leaving Lysychansk through the fields, so we got almost to Kostiantinivka. We settled there in a landing, where we spent 2 weeks recuperating and cleaning up. Then, I was sent to a hospital for treatment, and the guys went to Chernihiv region. There, they were already getting along and almost reforming our brigade after the losses. Out of our 8 men, we lost 4, 1 killed and 3 captured, while other units were worse off. It's always easy to criticize, but looking back, even with what we had, we could have defended Severodonetsk more effectively with proper leadership and communication. If we had asked the infantry directly what they needed and where to fire, it would have been 10 times more effective. We were given coordinates and permission to fire from above. But while they were giving it, the situation changed, and the infantry needed new coordinates. The infantry asked us to shoot here, but we could not, because we were given numbers from above. There was no direct effective contact. As they say, everything was done through the crayfish cross. Everyone was spitting. How could this be? So sometimes we would pretend not to hear the command and talk directly to the guys from the infantry. The effect was bombastic. Our guys were shocked to see how we poured it accurately, and the result was that they could take a breather at the front. The Russians were shoveling it off and stayed away for a long time after that. Later on, our communication went much better and more direct, and we started using drones. Kherson, offensive, and the biggest losses. After the coordination in the summer, we were quickly transferred to the Kherson region on the border with Mykolaiv region. A major offensive was being prepared, and the supply of equipment and weapons had improved compared to the north. It was also hot there, constant shelling and cover, and we suffered heavy losses in our team. We recovered, and 2 guys out of 11 were killed at once. 3 more were wounded. It was somewhere near Sukhoi Pond. That day, we started working. We were given the coordinates, and the helicopters were working fine. We fired a mortar very successfully. We already had our own copter. We watched where each mine hit and corrected it in real time. It was very cool. We hit an armored personnel carrier, hit a trench where the Russians were sitting, and successfully fired 19 shots. After that, they started shooting at us from 2 kilometers away. At that position, I did not dig a large shelter for myself because I did not have a shovel or my back hurt. I found a small hollow, about 40 centimeters deep. I pulled an oilcloth over it to keep the rain from falling and laid on a cot in a sleeping bag, and it was great. The first explosions were about 100 meters away. It was falling closer, and the commander ordered everyone to take cover. So, we all hid in holes. It was already autumn. The forest was so burnt out, they could see us well, even though we were camouflaged. The guys also dug trenches close to each other, and I was 50 meters away from them. Mines fell right on our positions. In the pauses between explosions, we jumped up and down, and the commander ran a little bit shaky, but if he ran, he was okay. Then, Sanko was pulled out wounded, but the shelling did not stop. They put a tourniquet on his leg and barely dragged him to the car. He was heavy and big. Then they dragged another wounded man in and immediately sent him to the medics. The second car was hit in the gas tank, the jet was flowing, and it was full of ammunition, so we moved a little to the side. We started counting, and 2 were missing. We came back and found 2 guys ready in the trench. They died immediately. A mine can be placed on purpose so that it explodes a little above the ground. That's what happened. Both of them were hit at once. One in the head and the other in the heart from the back. There was no chance of survival. We came, and they were still sitting there. After this battle, we stayed in the Kherson region for a few weeks, and when the Russians retreated, we were thrown to Bakhmut. The Russians stood firmly near Kherson and equipped all their positions very well, mined them. And at some point, they simply withdrew. I cannot say that our offensive was strong. We were all shocked to see how quickly they fled across the Dnipro. Their maneuver was not very clear. Maybe they did not want to cross the Dnipro in winter. Our soldiers began to follow their positions and clear them of mines. We were surprised at how thoroughly everything was prepared for defense. What was very pleasant in the Kherson region was the attitude of the locals towards us. There was a great contrast with Luhansk and Donetsk regions, where we fought. Near Kherson, the population was extremely positive, and you could immediately feel that people were in favor of us. You can even see the attitude in the housing. Here in the Kiev region, we were settled in houses on a rotation basis. Everything was free. It was similar in Kherson region, but when we were in Kostiantynivka, when we left Bakhmut for a break, the locals charged us 1,500 hryvnias per person per day in a house. How is that possible? The battle for Bakhmut. We arrived in Bakhmut in the fall. We prepared well for the defense there, building fire shelters from concrete blocks at every intersection. We also had new Finnish mortars from Kherson region that could hit 8 kilometers instead of 6. Imported stuff is always imported, needless to say, and the BC gave us much more. We stood on the outskirts of Bakhmut, closer to the Russians, 1.5 to 2 kilometers from the front line, and we used our infantry to throw them a bone. We spent the night in Bakhmut itself when we were working. We climbed into some houses and basements during the shelling. In the end, I was mostly in Kostiantynivka, and they brought me to Bakhmut with fuel and ammunition. I was gradually dismissed from my job as a mortar operator because of severe health problems. I have almost no hearing. I started to faint. The guys were already saying, "Old man, don't go there anymore. As a soldier on the front line, I have already exhausted myself. I can't do it anymore." I talked to many infantrymen who were in the trenches on the first line in Soledar and Bakhmut. They say it is very difficult to withstand such attacks psychologically when they come in waves, as the Russians did in Soledar and Bakhmut. Some substances may play a role. People seem to feel no pain. If they get shot in the leg, they run. If they get shot in the arm, they keep running. This made our guys a little dizzy, and they were really scared at first. It was like in a zombie movie, it's not a joke. Wagner, or whoever, is walking like that. And then we got the hang of letting them get closer and shooting them more accurately in the head. They are really walking in full growth there. They seem to have no fear and no instinct for self-preservation. In the Donbass, the Russians still have a big advantage in artillery, and parity is still very far away. Russians and combat contact, I did not personally take any Russian prisoners this year, and had very little close combat contact. I did not have the opportunity to talk to them, to ask them why they are in Kaluga or Khabarovsk, why they are laying down their lives for Ukraine. Yes, our losses are great, but theirs are much greater. I spent a lot of time in hospitals with guys from the infantry, and they might not have seen any contact for 6 months. The enemy is in one trench, they are in another. There is shooting, but you cannot see. The main impression of the enemy in this war is artillery, mortars, hailstones, all usually in fragments. Mostly, special sabotage groups take prisoners. They are trained for this. They have equipment, night vision devices, silent weapons, and are very good with knives. They are special people who do this. Their people take ours prisoners in the same way. Sometimes there is a large-scale encirclement, but mostly such groups are captured. Most of the time during the war, we were hit by mortars. 80%. We hit them. They hit us. Then there's Grad, which is a nasty thing when it flies. The tank did not work on us, although there were explosions nearby. The helicopter was still shooting at us. You can hide from a mortar in Grad. You can hear them and have a few seconds to fall to the ground or into a hole. You hear a whistle, characteristic of a mortar. You have 2 seconds to run. Grad just covers the square, but there is even more time from the moment you hear it. The sound is like a steam train running. The noise is very unpleasant, but it mows people down a lot. The war now and in 2014 are very different. Even the airport, there was a lot of shooting. A red machine gun, there were dead and wounded. I got a concussion there. Nowadays, small arms are not used much. Mostly artillery is used. If you don't bury yourself, you have no chance. This is an unjust war. People are dying, and you can't do anything. You have an assault rifle, but you don't really need it. Alcohol at war. We practically did not drink at the positions there. You can count on one hand the times when we indulged in a little. There was a day, a holiday, and then 2 glasses. It's not used there. There are a few avatars, fighters who are always drunk, there, and there was a man in the neighborhood who was drinking and didn't care. But it's not like he's lying around, just drunk. The command finds him for this. They are fighting against it, but there are not many such avatars. We always have a serious ban on going to the front. When you're on rotation, it's taboo during the day, and if you're in the evening, you have to call and warn the commander that you're going to drink 50 grams. It is clear that you drink 150, but you don't go out without permission, and you don't drink anywhere. Books in the war is war, but sometimes you need to pass the time so that you don't just sit around even in combat positions. When there is a connection, the guys are constantly on the phone, and when there is no internet, they are as if without hands. As for me, I don't care if I have a phone or not. I call my family, and that's it. So I read books, mostly adventure and detective stories. There was a bombed-out village. Half the houses were gone. The next time you take an axe or a shovel, these are trophies. So do I. I'll find a book or crossword puzzles. It's a great thing. I'm reading to myself, and the guys go and bring me a sack. Here, old man, read it. I picked out a couple of them. I read them on the positions and let the guys laugh. It's not like they're crying. I have a small folding fishing chair. We arrived, fired 2 shots, and after that, we can sit and do nothing for 2 days. But in the shelter, the day was bright, and I was reading to myself. We got the command to fight, so we fired back. We waited until they were shooting at us. Then I sat down again and read on a chair. I remember reading detective stories, Gogol's Evenings on a Farm, and Taras Bulba. It helped to disconnect a bit. During the war, I must have read up to 10 books. Another guy in our group took to reading detective stories. He can't walk properly anymore, Sanyok, whom we rescued from an injury in Kherson region. Diseases in the war is both psychologically and physically difficult. There's a constant weight in your head, uncertainty is very heavy, you do not know what will happen tomorrow in half an hour. Constant loads and overloads of the BC. As soon as the place was changed, I had to dig and dig again. My back hurts incredibly. My age is not the same, but it's hard for younger people. As long as the aggressive theme is going on with the shelling, somehow you don't feel most of the sores. Then you come to the dump and you start coughing. Everything hurts at once. Then you come to a more aggressive place and you don't feel it again. Maybe it's the adrenaline. In the spring, my hip started to hurt unbearably. I couldn't sleep. We went to see a doctor. She looked at it and said we would go to the hospital in Kramatorsk tomorrow. They examined me there. Everything was fine. I said, give me something to sleep, some painkillers. They gave me something, and I was pricking myself. The next time I went there was no medicine. It was burnt and broken. There was also a girl there. I told her, what are you doing here, dear? Go away. The medical center was moved to the basement. There was a kid and a driver. The car had already been bombed. I come in. The girl is gone. Thank God. And the boy is in her place. The medic was so exhausted, he was completely out of it. I told him I needed hemorrhoid suppositories. Someone needed something for their head. Someone else needed something else. And I needed painkillers. He pulls out a pouch and pours out everything. Take this for the butt, take this for the head. He said to me, I'd give you painkillers, but the vodka will be here only in the evening, so come back. We laughed a lot. Many people suffer from hemorrhoids, sometimes as much as Russians. Boys get it from physical exertion and hypothermia. Before the Great War, I was treated and had an operation, so it doesn't bother me. But the guys have a problem. Most of them have pressure and headaches almost all the time. It's the same for me. Most of them always have chronic cough. Smoking is smoking, but sleeping on the ground doesn't just go away. Everyone also has back pain. Some more, some less. Emotional moments in the war. The most shocking thing about war is the losses. Friends die. It is so memorable and engraved. However, sometimes there are also heartwarming moments in war that are memorable. That's how the relationship with the guys is. There are constant jokes and jokes, giggles and giggles. It's nice to sit with the guys like that. We'll cook some food, even make shish kebabs, or bake some fish. By the way, we used to catch fish when we were in Severodonetsk. We lived in dachas in Sirotino. There was a pond there. You couldn't catch fish with a fishing rod because drones were flying, and it could be covered. So we made a trick. We had a rubber boat and put nets there at night. In the morning, we pulled them out, and they were good, and we fried them. This is the kind of romance that sometimes happens in war.